BioDrop is the voice and smell biomarker app that gets us back to business. And it can end the pandemic in 90 days. Let me show you how. First, we need to understand the problem that made SARS-CoV-2 into a pandemic. SARS-CoV-1, back in 2003, had about 10 times higher fatality rate than SARS-CoV-2. It had similar transmissibility, and it was contained. Here's the difference. Symptom onset was 2 to 3 days before infectiousness for SARS-CoV-1. For SARS-CoV-2, symptom onset is 2 to 3 days after infectiousness. Take 2 or 3 more days from symptom onset for testing, and by the time an infected person gets isolated, most of the infectious spreading has already happened. As a signal for mitigation, symptom onset worked well for SARS-CoV-1. But for SARS-CoV-2, it's a big failure. A better signal is urgently needed. A better signal is needed more than ever as the vaccines roll out across the world. Vaccines may actually worsen this problem. We know that vaccines reduce symptom onset, but we don't know if vaccines reduce infectiousness. Without symptoms, a vaccinated person may become an asymptomatic super spreader. A better signal is urgently needed. Dr. Dana Small, cognitive neuroscientist at Yale University School of Medicine, has been working on a better signal. It's well known that loss of smell is highly associated with COVID-19. What has not been known is if loss of smell is a better signal than symptom onset. Dr. Small led the clinical study using her Yale Jiffy smell test that uses a smartphone and common household odors like peanut butter and vinegar to demonstrate that loss of smell occurs a median of 2 days prior to detectable PCR signal. Dr. Small thinks the Yale Jiffy is a better signal. Dr. Small is collaborating with us now to embed the Yale Jiffy into BioDrop. Dr. Rita Singh, human voice profiling scientist at Carnegie Mellon University School of Computer Science, has been working on a better signal. Dr. Singh has demonstrated vocal fold asymmetry that can be transcribed from recording voice samples on a smartphone into vocal phase portraits is highly associated with COVID-19. MIT has demonstrated that vocal biomarkers transcribed from voice recording on a smartphone can be used to diagnose asymptomatic cases of COVID-19 with 100% sensitivity and 83% specificity. Dr. Singh is collaborating with us now to embed vocal biomarker transcription into BioDrop. How much better are the signals that can be derived from BioDrop's biomarkers? Dr. Daniel Larimore, computational social scientist at University of of Colorado School of Computer Science can tell us. Dr. Larimore actively builds and analyzes infection curve simulation models of the pandemic. He simulated the infection curve with no mitigation, lots of infection, and lots of death result. Then he simulated the infection curve if we could do a PCR test on everybody once a week. Even though it doesn't seem possible to do that under any conceivable strategy, but if we could, infection gets controlled, but does not clear. Finally, he simulates the infection curve if we could test for smell loss every day and assume that infection would be detectable 1 day after PCR detection. With that, infection clears within 10 weeks. With smell loss occurring a median of 2 days prior to PCR, demonstrated by Dr. Small at Yale, infection clears even sooner. This app transcribes biomarkers. Biomarkers are biological measures of biological states. The smartphone microphone transcribes sound of voice. The unsupervised generalized label magnitude scale uses the smartphone screen to transcribe smell sensation. It was developed by Dr. Small at Yale University School of Medicine for this project. Checkbox controls use the smartphone screen to transcribe symptoms. These biomarkers are all associated with COVID-19. These biomarkers are mapped to protocols that generate useful signals. The COVID-19 mitigation protocol is being mapped with deep learning artificial intelligence using powerful convolutional neural networks. These forms of artificial intelligence are highly suited for learning the mappings between biomarkers and useful signals. With Advent Health University, we are performing the clinical study to produce the data sets of biomarkers and useful signals that the artificial intelligence can learn to map. With these training and validation data sets, we expect to be able to produce useful COVID-19 signals, including infection stage, positive diagnosis, and negative screening diagnosis. These are the signals that hold the promise of ending the pandemic in less than 90 days, as demonstrated by Dr. Larimore's infection mitigation simulations. There is an urgent need to generate these data sets as fast as possible. The quickest path to generating these data sets is massive participation. With massive participation, these data sets can emerge within 4 to 6 weeks. To get massive participation, the clinical study is being crowdsourced. Viral social media will be harnessed to generate massive participation. Everybody with a smartphone is eligible to participate. Donations will be solicited from the participants to help fund this massive clinical study that hold promise to end the pandemic quickly. Diagnostic protocols like COVID-19 mitigation protocol are subject to FDA regulation and require clinical studies for FDA review. But entry protocols that venues employ to grant or deny access are not the subject of FDA enforcement. While the massive clinical study is underway, the voice, smell, and symptom biomarkers will be immediately available for use by entry protocols. Many venues, like churches, schools, hospitals, employers, sports teams, entertainment venues, airlines, restaurants, retail, etc., are already using some form of entry protocols to grant or deny access. These venues can be made safer by enhancing these entry protocols to use the daily voice, smell, and symptom biomarkers transcribed by the app. These venues can be made safer by enhancing these entry protocols to use the unique contact tracing capabilities on the app. When an individual tests COVID-19 positive subsequent to attending a venue, then each individual that attended that venue at that same time will be indicated for contact tracing. Subsequent entry protocols can consider implications of such contacts. We anticipate great demand for hosting these enhanced entry protocols. It makes venues that are already open safer. It allows venues that have partially opened to open further. It allows some venues that have not opened to open. People will feel safer coming to these venues. People will be safer coming to these venues. While the app is free to users, hosting these protocols generates revenue from fees paid by venues. Hosting entry protocols will be a rich source of revenue. In order to rapidly expose the app to large and diverse populations, churches will be offered entry protocol hosting free of charge. Hospital systems will be offered sponsorships of church entry protocol hosting to further accelerate its adoption. While the massive clinical study is requisite for the curation of diagnostic signals that are useful for guiding individual clinical interventions, these biomarkers are immediately useful for public health protocols. Public health protocols utilize community biomarkers that are composites of the biomarkers of each individual within a community. Communities may be blocks, neighborhoods, zip codes, or towns. Whatever level of granularity a public health jurisdiction deems useful. Public health protocols are based on community biomarker levels and the calculus of their changes. Public health protocols signal public health interventions like lockdowns and masking mandates based on community biomarker levels and their calculus. Public health protocols will equip public health jurisdictions to act wisely, effectively, and objectively in ways that can be widely supported. Public health protocols can be used to further enhance entry protocols. Entry to venues could be denied to individuals that reside in communities where public health interventions are indicated. This increases the effectiveness of the public health protocols and the usefulness of the entry protocols. While the app is free to users, hosting public health protocols generates revenue from fees paid by public health jurisdiction. Hosting public health protocols will be a rich source of immediate revenue. A better signal is urgently needed. Everybody on Earth has 2 detectors positioned perfectly for the early sensitive detection of COVID-19. All we have to do is transcribe their biomarkers every day for everybody. The better signal we urgently need.